this is our session before the lunch. It's going to be a very interesting one. We have a great combination of lawyers, some startups, someone from multinational companies, so it's going to be an exciting time. So a great turnout today. We were a little apprehensive last evening when we found out there's a Bandh today in Karnataka. We were not sure whether the cabs would be running, but it's really great to see all of you here. So a warm welcome to all of you again. So I was just doing a rough calculation of, what's happening here. In the last 12 hours and the hours to follow, we'll have about 15 to 20 impactful speakers here in this hall on the dais. Now, if you really add it up, it's about 200 years of experience, more than 200 years of experience right here in between us. For me, it's like a, all you can eat, a spread of buffet of, wisdom, experience, advice. And it's really up to us as the audience, it's all you can eat buffet. So you have to take the next step, really connect with the speakers, maybe ask them a few questions, meet them over chai, and really get to know them. So with that, I would now like to invite Mr. Vijay. If you could please come on the stage. Mr. Vijay is a corporate securities lawyer with 18 years of experience. He works with startups and with MNCs. He's a man known for simple solutions. He comes up with solutions for complex transactions in the field of PE, M&A, and infrastructure. With that, Vijay, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Days of your startup or even how to start up itself. Now you had some great inputs, and one of the inputs which I particularly liked was about the fact that only about 4% of companies that are funded survive, and something like 1% of those 4% thrive. So in this panel, we are going to focus on those 4% that survive and focus on how they're going to grow. So the topic for this session is Boosters for Growth. And I'd like to start by introducing the stellar star cast that we have in our panel. The first speaker I'd like to introduce to you is Mithun Sacheti. Mithun is the co-founder and CEO of Carrot Lane, which a lot of you will be familiar with. It's one of the very successful online jewelry companies which is focused around diamonds. Mithun, can you please join us here? And to continue and complete the introduction, they have raised 4 rounds of funding from Tiger. And they are well on their way to the growth phase. So a very, very logical and interesting candidate for this session. The next panelist I'd like to introduce to you is Mariam Mahmood Matthew. Mariam is the COO of Manorama Online. That's the digital media operation of the Malayalam Manorama Group, which needs no introduction. They're for the few of you who might not know enough about them, Malayalam Manorama is one of the leading publishing groups in the country and probably the dominant one in the south. And Mariam runs the entire online operation for them, and I'm sure we'd love to hear the inputs on how she has grown that piece of the business. Mariam, can you join us, please? I would next like to introduce Gopal Srinivasan. He is the founder, chairman, and managing director of TVS Capital Funds Limited. He's a 3rd generation member of the TVS group. He's had tons of operational, managerial, and investing experience and has invested in a lot of high-quality growth companies. He's funded a lot of SMEs, and we'd love to hear his experience. Gopal, please join us here. Lastly, I'd like to introduce Mr. V.S. Parthasarathy or Partha. Partha is the CFO, CIO, head of M&A, and a member of the board of the Mahindra & Mahindra Group. As you can see, he wears a lot of hats, has a lot on his plate, and yet always has time for a humorous crack or two. I'd like to invite Partha to join us here, please. He would be adding very valuable inputs to this piece.
Yep. Yeah, I thought you guys had tea, right? Chai pe charcha was there. But why is there so much fika after, when it comes to claps?
I told you, Partha always has time for humorous quips. Okay. So I think in this session, why this session is important is, I think in an entrepreneur's journey or in a startup's journey, I think the most important and critical phase is the growth stage. Yes, many of you would argue that surviving the first step and being amongst the 4% is very important. I don't dispute that. But once you get funded, or once you raise your Series A funding, the story doesn't end there. You can't be calling yourself a success yet or congratulating yourself or patting yourself on the back. As I see it, the real work begins once you get there and once you get into growth mode, so to speak. So here we have 4 experts, and I'm going to ask them a few questions. And the way we're going to run this panel is we'll have different types of questions being thrown at different panelists, and each of them, the interesting part of this mix of this panel is each of them comes from a completely different kind of background. Mithun is in a startup, highly funded, very wealthy, but nonetheless a startup in growth mode.
Very wealthy.
Very well.
Very, very wealthy.
You said it, Mithun. I didn't. And so I think, so we have somebody like him, and we have somebody like Gopal, who's been on the operating side and switched over to the investing side, which is a very interesting mix. So he's been there and done all that. And then we have somebody like Partha, who's closed tons and tons of acquisitions for Mahindra Group, which we'll be talking about. And Mariam, of course, comes again from one of the old family businesses, deeply entrenched. But within that group, she's trying to create something which is more like a startup. So very, very interesting set of experiences. So, you don't have a mic, I'm sorry.
Sorry, I don't think they want me to actually speak loud enough.
Can you hear me without this mic? I have a collar mic, yeah. So I'm just going to speak like this. So the first question I have, Mithun, is for you, right? So let's start with you because you're closest to the ground for many of the people here. Though, like you said, you're much wealthier than most of them, right? So what would you say are the top 3 attributes? I mean, it doesn't have to be 3, but I'm just picking a number. If you had to pick your top 3 or top 4 attributes that you would say that entrepreneurs should look for while pursuing growth partners, because I think the stage we are talking about in this panel is about a company like yours, which has raised a few rounds of funding. But how was it when you had closed your Series A, business was going well, and you were at a stage where you needed to, step up the game? What were the attributes that you look for to identify the right growth partners?
Is this working? So first I want to put this whole wealth thing to rest. I sit on the stage with Partha, who comes from Mahindra Group. I got TVS Capital with all the money in the world, and then it's Mariam from Malayalam Manorama, and he calls me that I have a lot of wealth over here. So realistically,
I meant wealth of experience, Mithun.
Even that.
Yeah, but I have to say something. I have all the checks. I write all the checks, but the balance is all seems to be with you, right?
I think he meant the wealth of others. That's what
I think so.
That I do.
So that's my own. So you got 5 questions to answer to start.
All right. Okay, so I mean, it's a sort of a tricky one because especially at Series A, you're basically like a beggar, and the first money that comes your way, you take it. You really, I don't think, have all the luxury in the world to go out and choose. And at least for us, it was 2011. It wasn't 2014. It was a very different time as well. And you take money the way it comes. it was a freak accident for us that this happened. We got a LinkedIn request from Tiger Global, and that's how we raised the funds. It was just, we just got lucky, I would say, at that point. I don't think there was much thesis going on at that point as well. I mean, there was a thesis saying that these are the sectors they want to get into, and we were just lucky to be an early player at that point. So I'm not sure whether I have a really great answer for you for that, what should be. I would say Series B or later is more where you want to raise funds at that time, and it's very, very important to have a partner. But my Series A partner is not a typical Series A partner. He normally comes much later in the cycle. So for me, those were easy. And I would go to a later stage where I had an option of multiple term sheets, and I had to make a decision because that's the one that possibly will relate this better. I had somebody else who offered us 25% more value than what we were getting, which meant that it would be 25% more dilution for me personally as such. And at those times, there were certain key set of attributes that you look at. I was quite keen as well to look at those 2 term sheets which I had, but I spent a lot of time trying to understand the other companies which they had successfully managed to scale up. And I spoke a lot to the entrepreneurs whose companies that they were scaling up, and I asked them what they would do if they were in my place. And and that actually was just the answer for me, because a lot of them did turn around and said that if you have a really world-class partner who can take you all the way through, you would rather go with that than have a higher valuation, because if the partnership is, and every fund has a size. So if the fund you're looking at does not have the bandwidth to fund your next round as well, if you intend to ever have a next round on that part, then you will, and if by chance you hit turbulence, then you'd be in a difficult position at that time. So that was one of the key points for me to decide on Tiger as opposed to anybody else. And along with that came a small check from someone else who could write a significantly larger check later on if needed as well. I think from, the other part that is very important to understand is that how many of those funds have actually taken a business at growth stage from there to logical end itself also. If they are just, so if you look at funding like or like a business, like if you're the train that takes investors from one destination to, let's say it's going from Bangalore all the way to Chennai, and if the investors tend to get in somewhere at the end of Chennai and get off somewhere in between, let's say at, if their logical destination is to get off at, I don't know the station in between, but Dharmapuri, if that's not your destination, then it might be easier to go with an investor at that stage who can walk with you all the way till the end as well. So life of the fund, the time that they're going to be able to spend with you, their ability to raise funds again for you, I think those were the important drivers for us, and we were happy to take a haircut on the valuation, but go with a partner who we knew would work well. And the other part also was that a known devil was better than an unknown, so we went with someone who we had done work with before as opposed to somebody else out there.
Great. So, Mariam, I'm going to throw a similar question at you. This is not necessarily the same question because your growth model has been a little different. You've never taken external funding, as far as I know at least. I hope I'm right on that. So, how is it that you approached Manorama Online? You have been doing this for a decade now. And
2 actually.
2 decades now. So how have you looked at the whole funding requirement from a growth perspective? Has it been purely funded internally? Or what would you recommend to an organization that's not necessarily as big as yours, but which is not as early stage as CaratLane, for example, which is somewhere in between? What would be your strategy, and do you see the Manorama Group going ahead with the same kind of a strategy of not looking at external funding, but purely looking at tapping internal sources?
So I think when we talk about funding, when we're talking about a company which is 126 years old, it's a company which is in a mature market already, right? So when you're in a mature market, the reasons for funding are very different. And when we started digital, which was actually as far along ago as 1994, it was still an experimental stage, and it was still very early in the digital era really to even go into VC funding, and we had enough resources at that point to kind of pay the monies for it. But actually, we did think about going that route when we talked about TV in 2006. So we did speak to a lot of VCs around that time. What we found in the conversation was that VC funding for mature markets, products like and companies like us, it comes with a lot of tags attached with it, and not necessarily tags that we would be agreeable to. So as a result, for us, we figured that debt was better than VC funding. So that's the way we've gone. Having said that, have we ever got external funding? Yes. This is now way back in 1947 when we actually reopened our company. We did.
Okay.
But that's just trivial history for you.
But what would your answer be any different if instead of 1994 you were to start digital media today?
So even today, it depends on the kind of products you come into. So now, for example, we have a whole bunch of classifieds products, which are actually quite large in the state itself. So it's the largest classifieds product in the state. Now, were I to make it into a national product, and these are some things which you're thinking of, when you talk about high growth products, definitely VC funding comes into play.
Sure. That's an interesting perspective. And so we've heard Mithun and Mariam talk about the funding aspect of it and whether you should find a growth partner, who the growth partner should be, etc. We have a potential growth partner sitting right here next to me, and a very, very big one at that. And so I'm going to start, Gopal, by asking you this question. You made a choice to focus on growth equity. So you don't operate in the VC space, you don't operate in a very large buyout space. You've chosen the growth equity space as the preferred area to focus on. So can you walk us through the rationale of that decision and why you thought or continue to think that growth equity is the most meaty part of the ecosystem today?
No, it's like asking somebody why they started a college and not a school, right? So ultimately, all companies have to go through stages of their own evolution. We've got amazing startups. I think we have Mithun here. We have got basically companies which go from startup to early growth,
right,
where fundamentally the business model is working, they have unit economics, but they're kind of saying, how do I really scale, right? More than this, maybe other countries. And then you have really core growth,
sure,
which is much more about what people like Partha background is from, and perhaps to some extent my background, which is building the framework, making sure the institutionalization mechanisms are working, the processes are working. And essentially the company is either going towards some kind of permanent status, which is listing or whatever, or getting maybe perhaps joining another joint family and becoming a merged acquisition.
Right.
That's the typical journey. So we felt that, where we fish is important. So let the upstream generate all kinds of opportunities, but we are going to sit like that bear, where the salmon come in and just wait for the fish to come at a certain size, because that's what we understand.
Understood.
And when people come to us, what they want is they want some mature advice. They want very, very good access in terms of business development. They want basically the ability to prepare the company for the next stage. So growth is something that is very logical. I've done about 8-9 businesses before I started this.
Right.
So I thought growth is something that we understand and we should kind of do well. And we got to remember one thing, that basically working with a company in growth stage or at VC stage is pretty much like a live-in relationship. So this is not something we have dinner and go. You basically are going to get comments about everything from your, way you run your business, the way you treat your employees, the way you look this morning, and whether your clothes are right or not. It's very deep relationship.
Indeed.
So I think growth is a kind of phase where I feel we are good to do that. I don't think we'll be able to do a good job at VC. It takes a very, very different type of talent, which you have in India, fortunately.
Sure,
so, but we feel we do this best.
Absolutely. Now, let's start with Partha. Mahindra, right? You've done more than 75 M&A transactions in the last decade. Maybe a couple are still brewing as we speak. Who knows? Now, the question is, you clearly had a lot of booster shots. You've had a lot of growth booster shots. Now, the question from what I would like to ask you is, would you recommend to a company like, say, Mithun's, who are in a high growth stage of their life, would you recommend to them that an inorganic heavy, or inorganic heavy meaning an M&A driven, acquisition driven growth strategy is inevitable or is a more optimal strategy than a purely organic model? What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Thanks. First of all, very happy to be here in a sense, and I wanted to start by saying I've got great pleasure in raising your average age as soon as I walked onto this stage. Okay, and that's what I do to part of my organization. And M&M has got many things about. We are in 18 industry. Some of them are very traditional industry, as everybody claimed, but one section is dedicated to what we call as Mahindra Partners, which is only startup companies. Sure. We incubate startup companies and incubate entrepreneurs. So I understand a little bit of the jargon here, but not too much. Okay.
I'm sure you understand a lot of it and wrote some of it.
So that's one. The second one is we just launched an e-commerce platform called M2All, which brings the entire Mahindra, everything under Mahindra under one roof in a digital format, or a e-mall as I call it. So that's something that you may want to look at some stage. This is more to kind of anchor that to this discussion about startups and so on.
Sure.
So if you're looking at an answer of saying, should we follow organic or inorganic thing, I've always asked the question, what's your strategy? What are you looking at? Why are you doing what you're doing? If you got no strategy, then forget organic, forget inorganic, just don't do anything. Better off, just like that. Once you have your strategy, then you can think about what makes sense to get that strategy. What makes, somebody talked about dream. Right. In the earlier session, about your vision. So what makes sense to get to that vision, get to that dream? And if inorganic makes sense within that, then do. Not for sake of inorganic. Give an example, USA, biggest market for us in tractors, we went that all organic, not a single inorganic one. So we went from being 0 to being the top 3 in US just by being organic. Wow. And all steps, and it took 94 we started, 2007 we broke into top 10, 2012 we broke into top 5, and we are now top 3. Wow. So it's taken that kind of journey, okay? But we said that makes sense because the product, services, everything were there. We went to China. So they said no products from India, Naina. So you can't get products from India because it becomes very costly. And the product from there cannot come here. So then it makes immense sense to have inorganic strategy in China.
Sure.
So I always said, only do inorganic when it makes sense, not because you want to make great sense, Just if you want empire building, no. If you want to actually have strategy in place and want to execute, then go for inorganic strategy. And I said, but please do think inorganic, otherwise I won't have a job. Okay?
Nor me. So yes, please do think inorganic. And in fact, I would say this to Mithun, right? That's an interesting observation that Partha is making, that you need to figure out whether it makes sense or not. But the key difference here is Mahindra and Mahindra can wait for 14 years to break in from 15 to 2 or 15 to 3. You don't have the luxury of waiting so many years because A, you have already got Series A investors who need an exit. So you need to have growth happen at a much faster pace, right? So while doing this, what sort of red flags would you, wave to all these people out here, potential entrepreneurs, budding entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs who are in the growth stage? What kind of a red flag would you wave to them in terms of the whole process of finding the right growth equity partners? I know you said that you've been lucky in the sense that you've had just partner with one, but I'm sure you've seen experiences of others around you, and you must have dealt with it before you had subsequent rounds from Tiger. Please walk us through some of the red flags that you would.
So there's this, your SHA has a lot in it, which the shareholder agreement. I think that's singly that's the document that I think one must learn to read very early. I feel it's a very practical document, and it's something. Firstly, if you refer an SHA, your relationship is dead pretty much. But even death comes at a price, right? And you got to figure out how that functions. So I think you got to plan for that as well, and have that read very well. And a few key things in that is, I think the tenure of the fund must match the tenure of your business. What you're projecting as well, and must take it. And there must be a safety net for yourself also. So if you think your business is going to take 6 years to mature or 8 years to mature, and the fund's tenure is 4 years, then I think you've kind of not chosen the right partner to be with on that part. It's almost like the organic and inorganic you mentioned as well with it. And if my business is not, I mean, I'm not Flipkart, right? I'm not going to have a 100x growth in a 10-year, I mean, in a 4-year time frame as such, and I need to be realistic about that part. So I cannot have the same kind of, thought process or expectation set with my investors as I have, and that was it took me a month because my investor is also the largest investor in Flipkart, and you know, I really wanted to make sure that his understanding of my business is the same and is the same as I have it, and it's not the same as what he expects out of Flipkart, because and a lot of other companies that they have. They're very, very high growth companies. In some sense, I like to say, you know, I'm not a necessity, and I am a luxury in that sense, but luxury essential, maybe that's a new category coming out. So luxury essential. And so the expectation of growth is aligned to that, and thus gets aligned also on cost acquisition and everything else in the business as well. So aligning all of that is the most important part with the mindset of the investor and ourselves. We need the longer tenure than what possibly is expected out of a lot of other businesses out there as well. We are past that stage. The other part was the SHA, and it was a really big difference in, I mean, while I didn't say that first, but that was a big difference in choosing the partner as well, because the terms and conditions over there make a huge impact on the way you perceive risk. And whatever is said and done, when you take money from somebody else, there is immense pressure on yourself to perform as well. All this sitting in front of somebody and talking actually just keeps adding pressure every single time. So that's why it's very, in some sense, it's very daunting. You know, every time you go and speak, you say something, it's going to get tweeted, and now it's like registered in Google history for life. And if you don't deliver on that part of it, then, you know, 4 years later, you're going to be that example they speak about in the same exact forum as well. So that pressure that's starting to build, you've got to make sure that you have, now imagine that pressure when you've taken money from someone else. You have to deliver on that money as well, and it's very important to have that alignment done very, very well on that part. And the SHA is important because that has many terms and conditions which you don't speak about while discussing the business as such. And I have seen many businesses which have had a really, really rough ride with doing that. The other part to see is also how things go wrong all the time, right? I mean, if someone's going to do an early stage business, they also know the risks associated with it. Is how has that investor dealt with things when they've gone wrong? What have they done with those companies when things have gone wrong? I mean, I know of many examples of companies which have had a really bad, promoters who had a really rough ride. They've tried their best. It didn't work out, whatever. I mean, that's what happens in life. But what happened when how did the investor deal with it is a very, very important thing as well. We've seen cases where they've been taken to the cleaners by the investors, and we've seen cases where they've been given $1 exits by the investors as well. Keep the business, you tried your best, but at $1, I'm going to sell my stake back to you, and you figure out your life ahead, but I don't want to be a part of this journey ahead as well. So those are also important aspects of it. Now, every investor doesn't do that and shouldn't do that because he has a responsibility to his own shareholder also. So I think it's an unfair expectation, but there are people who do that part of it, and then there is a premium that you got to pay to be a part of that as well. So to me, those are my learnings.
Can I add to that? See, I think what Mithun talked about was the beginning and the end, and that's obviously the most important thing that you think about. But I mean, I think what you alluded to in the beginning about relationships and VCs, it's really choosing the right partner for anything is really like a marriage, right? There is a mating dance where everybody kind of gives all the money and throws all the money in there, and then it's the choice level of who you go with. And I think it's very important that you not only look at the entry and the exits, but also what is happening in between, what is their past relationships with other companies in terms of the growth stage.
Sure.
So in what have they done and what have they contributed? And every VC or every VC's philosophy is not the same for every company. And one has to figure that one out and really go with the correct partner. And it's better to take a little longer to think through that process than to go into that process in a hurry. I'm saying this not from my MM experience, but more from my banking experience before, but sure. I just thought I should add that part.
She's right. Too much dowry is always a bad thing.
No dowry is the best thing, right? And I'm sure, Gopal, you have a similar view on the subject as well, because the point that Mariam is making about making sure that philosophically you align to the right VCs or the right private equity funds, as much applies to you of chasing down the right companies with a similar thought process in mind.
And I think it's therefore quite an important thing to think about as to when you approach a growth company. For example, today we are in a situation where, the reason I think this event has got so much of energy and attendance is because many companies in the stages of growth, one is you just go to angel. Some people just want to go to their own money, perhaps before that. Some people want to go to a VC quickly.
Sure.
I just met somebody in the morning who took a VC A stage at practically startup. Many VC stage companies are actually going to growth also equally. Why? I think the why part is an important thing to think about there. One is, of course, the compatibility part. SHA, she said marriage. I think of it as live-in relationship. It's because everybody knows it's going to end at some finite point in time. I think the thing that people should go to growth for, if you're going to a growth company rather than a VC company, I would say 3 things I would strongly recommend. First is, don't go to a growth company without unit economics. Right? If you think that sales minus cost of goods is negative, this is not the right time.
Sure.
That is, a VC can understand and help you reach the scale to do that much, much better than a growth company. But once you've done that, that's one criteria. The second thing is every growth investor has only one thing they look for, right? They basically look for when this company will become ROE positive, and ideally when the ROE will start changing constantly upward. This is like the holy grail, and this is the holy grail, I think, for him equally.
Absolutely.
Ultimately, that's the only thing the investors want to see. So are you ready to show ROE at some point in time? Maybe it's 2 years, 3 years in some significant way, which therefore means logically that your business model is working and your execution engines are somewhat firing. In fact, if execution engines are firing perfectly, you don't need the growth equity partner.
Right.
You kind of need it when there is this opportunity to get somebody's capital and money to make the execution platform work.
Sure.
So most times you go to a growth equity company because A, you want to fix your execution, with which you want to grow more, whether it's regionally, adjacent categories, the next white space, or whatever it is, because each business is different, right? Or just scale within your own area.
Right.
We should not forget that just the SECA families today in some top 10 cities, you probably have numbers, but 10, 12 million families.
Yeah.
It's like one small European country, or one big European country.
Big Europe, yeah.
So there is plenty of growth in what you're currently doing. And the last thing that people go to growth for is they kind of want to say, and I won't talk about what we look for, I'll come to that separately.
Sure.
But basically they want to come and say they want to get ready for listing. They want to get ready for sale. So they want to get the corporate governance part right. They want to have their board meetings run well. They want to have a monthly steering committee review. They want to induct one of our people into their management committee for their weekly or fortnightly meetings. So they kind of want to make the company work well. That is a good intention. So I would say that would be the order in which people come to us. So they've got unit economics, ROE is not too far away in terms of growing up really well, right? They want to basically fix their execution to a higher level, but already it's working at one level. And lastly, because they want the governance and the rest of it to work, so whenever they go to the next stage, they're ready. Those would be the 4 things. And I think the chemistry part, which both of them talked about,
is very important.
It's absolutely
even in a
important.
live-in relationship.
Yeah, because the SHA is only one onerous instrument they have. But in reality, we pick up the phone or we are in WhatsApp all the time, saying what happened today, how was yesterday, did that work, did you meet this person? So it's actually a very, very engaged relationship, as I'm sure Mithun knows well. So.
Absolutely. So the related question I have for you, Partha, is when we talk about growth and growth stage and all that, very often people make the mistake of just looking at it in a unidimensional way, saying, I have to raise PE money and I have to go out and acquire, or I have to build out on my own organically. You probably often look at things the other way around. You're probably selling to people that they should look at growth also as a situation where they get absorbed onto a larger platform like yours. So what do you see as, how do you see as a challenge of selling to growth equity companies and teams that they should not be just looking at Gopal to raise money and at somebody else to buy them out, whereas they can equally have an exciting journey of growth by moving on to a larger platform like yours? How do you make the case for that?
Yeah, so just I want to back off, and I don't want to duck that question, so I'll come back. So just to add on to what was being said, Mahindra as a philosophy says to everybody that I'll be the angel investors balance here to find money from elsewhere. So one of the key things is, as you start out, most of you will not have the choice of saying I don't want money.
Sure.
Yeah, most of us will say I need money, because we say every time you just go and get money. I mean, and each startup has to then go and get whatever you call it, angel investor, VC, by whatever name. Basically, you got to sell the story.
Sure.
And the key thing that differs is what stage of the story are you? Have you planted a land, grown some crop, and are telling the guys that here is I can grow crop at this yield, but I want to multiply it 100 times? Or you come and say I can buy a land and do this kind of and make India green. And that's my concept that I'm wanting money for.
Sure.
Based on this, you are then seeing which of the kind of person will get attracted. And when whoever gets attracted to that story is going to come with his condition. And within that, if you have a choice, then you start thinking about the fit in terms of doing that. Okay? Otherwise you have only one choice, either to go ahead or not to go ahead. The second round creates more choice, and the third round creates more choice. Yeah, and that's where the concept between what you're saying, that once you decided on a story, strategy plus execution, are you going to build tenacity as the third condition for success? Strategy plus execution plus tenacity. And on the other hand, for a small story, Mithun will say, fail fast, fail cheap. Okay, so these two have to kind of balance, and that's where it comes in. Okay, now I want to make a case for where we come in. See, one of the key things is, if I can give you an environment of a garage operation, meaning you can do it in a frugal innovation methodology that you are doing, but I can bring an ecosystem where I can introduce you to 200,000 employees in one shot. I can introduce you to 200,000 other units who are there and multiply it by the family members. So then I'm talking about 5 million, let's say, basic constituents who I can put you in touch with. Yeah? And then bring the fact, say, we trust in you. Yeah? So the trust is important brand. So if you attach to me, then the entire ecosystem starts thinking about trust.
Right.
That is now an assurance. It's like saying buy Mahindra could give you some trust. So that's the kind of solid path when we acquire growth companies and say, come, you grow with us and we can actually help. On the other hand, there are some times when you say you cannot help them on the growth. So the best thing is to say, do it separately, don't even come near me. I will do everything as an investor, but I will not try to put my envelope around it.
Sure.
Then it is only convincing only as a pure investor.
Right.
Okay? So let's say I'm going to Reva as a company. Then I can say, listen, I bring the ecosystem of my dealers, of my employees, everything. Yeah? And that I'm in an automobile field.
Right.
But if I go into solar, then I need to think differently. So,
Right.
so you need to put both these hands, and that's the kind of difference I want to bring. But either way, it's great to be with Mahindra, okay?
Okay. No, that is a very interesting perspective. Thank you for that.
And unbiased remark.
Unbiased, of course. Totally unbiased and no vested interest there whatsoever.
No, you wanted me to make a case, so I made a case.
No, absolutely. And the reason I wanted you to make the case is because enough gets talked about private equity as an option. I mean, there has been 10, 15 years of investment activity, so there's been enough talk about private equity as an option.
If I just add one point on Mahindra's about from outside perspective.
Please.
In many ways, from the outside perspective, if there is the best buyout private equity permanent capital platform in this country, it's Mahindra's. Because they have that kind of entrepreneurship and they have this kind of thinking. So, I mean, I'm not saying it because we have a 50-year or 100-year relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's quite amazing since I know many of his colleagues well.
Absolutely. I mean, I want to reciprocate that about TVS, but I will do it at an opportune moment.
Opportune.
Let's not make it that obvious. I agree with you.
You have been warned that there is going to be an opportune moment. Moving on again to Mithun, we've talked enough about money, I think. Everybody's done with talking about money. And that's not the only booster that you need.
So you said done talking about money?
For now.
Okay.
Oh.
on this session.
We didn't realize such a concept existed, but it's okay.
No, what I'm trying to basically get at is money is one part of the growth story. Very important part of the growth story, important fuel. But what else would you say are the key boosters? Some other things which you think are very important for a startup that's getting into growth mode?
I think team. Your management team is possibly the most, the ability to have, you need to build some kind of, over a period of time, some kind of telepathy with that management team as well. It should almost be like two people think of a great idea at the same time almost.
Sure.
You should, I mean, they don't have to be the same great idea, but they're at least thinking about a great idea to go forward at the same time at least, because then it's just redundant if everyone thinks of the same idea. But there should not be one, and I think the single biggest difference that VC money has made to our business has been the ability to hire really, really good, talented people on that part of it.
Sure.
I don't think it made no difference to the jewelry side of the business. I come from that, so that's not really helped us so much over there. But I don't think had that not been there, we would have been able to hire and sustain them for the entire growth journey itself. So I think your biggest, for me, the biggest asset has been my team, and I feel they are the ones that who drive a lot of new things, new initiatives that we do. A lot of ideas that we are doing. I mean, I was in this industry for 7 years before. My family has been in for 5 generations before. And I think in the last 7 years, we've achieved more than my 5 generations. I mean, I shouldn't deride that, but my 5 generations plus this in terms of new idea creation, we've done more in the last 7 years than we have done in all of that put together. And that's only, the force multiplier has been the team really. Their ability to not get boxed into the same thought process that I as an entrepreneur keep thinking about it has been amazing for me at least. Early enough, 6 years back we were doing 3D printing. It's today people think about it like, wow, 3D printing is coming and doing everything else about it. It's completely different. Today we're talking about doing gold 3D printing. That's what we're doing in the factory. If I go to a jewelry company and talk about it, they feel like, what are you even talking about? It doesn't even make sense. It has to be made this way. It has to be different. Old traditional thought process, and I ran a business like that for a very long time. So 30 days manufacturing timelines. Today's 48 hours. Wow. I learned from the auto guys, right? I'm in Chennai. I have the luxury of learning so much from them. There is so much that we didn't think, their ability to think laterally came from the team. It was definitely not my idea. And I would not have had any of that had it not been for my amazing team for this. Yeah. So I think team is the single most important thing. And if you ask me to name 3, I'd say team, team, and team every time.
Very.
That's a very powerful message.
Can I add something
Please.
to kind of couple of them to it? So when you're thinking about this thing, think about one verse called counsel without fear and support without restraint. So before you start on a project, have as many counseling sessions, brainstorming, fight, everything. And once the project starts off, then you support that without restraint. Have this consensus among the team that before you start off, do everything, as much brainstorm. If there is somebody who's standing there always pulling you back after that, you die death 100 times. And I think if I were to analyze why 90 out of 100 fail, this is the single most reason that there are teams, members within the team who didn't support the concept fully. True. So counsel without fear and support without restraint. Get that thing. Right. The second thing, in a different way I will put what he said, there are only 3 things in life: thrilling, pulling and feeling. Keep that in mind. Always keep that in mind. अरे यार तालियां बजाते हो तो जोर से बजाओ, नहीं तो मत बजाओ. And the other last thing is diversity. And I think he mentioned in a different way, but I want to get that context very clear. You will only get good thoughts if you have diversity in this. Every board need to have a woman. I think it is one of the best things the government has proposed. Why? Not because of anything, because diversity will come only when you have different kind of people, new thoughts. So diversity is the third thing that you said that, but I just wanted to bring it So it's
if I
that
said
important.
diversity for women in my company, I'd get killed. Let's say men are diversity.
No, I didn't mean only women. I just gave one example. Getting different kind of people, not the same guys who say the same thing. You will never get new ideas after you started. So. Yeah, but I love that women business thing as well. Yeah, I want to get more senior. I did a full session.
Let's hear more about this one, the women business.
Yeah, I love that concept. I want more and more. Yeah. No, sorry.
We should hear from a woman. So
Yeah.
So I think team obviously is the first thing that you think about. In the team itself, then there are three other things I think you need to really think about. One is constant innovation. It's very important that throughout the process, and this is especially obviously more important for more mature companies like ours, which is there has to be constant innovation and disruptions within the company. You have to be willing to disrupt your own products and services and your own thinking. And that will come only, again, if you encourage free thinking in the process and encourage the trial and error method where you have failures which will come out. So constant innovation means not only innovations outwards towards products and services, but also in terms of workflows and systems which you have within the group. So there are tons of things which are happening that you need to look out for all the time. The second thing is, company level transformation which has to be responsive. So it has to be responsible. See, the thing is that today, it's not like what it was even 4 or 5 years ago. The marketplace is changing so rapidly that you have to have that mindset to respond to that changes, and not only the mindset, but the back end to respond to those changes. So it's very important that you have that. And for that, you need the third thing, which is cutting edge technology. You need cutting edge technology to do these two things on top.
No, but that's a very interesting point you make. It's sort of like what happened with Netflix, right? They cannibalized their own model. Essentially, that's what they did. They killed their own business, and excuse me, on the grave of the old business, they built the new business, if you will. And the message that you give, that technology is very important, is there. So what has been your experience of doing that? I mean, it is a very, in some ways, sensitive question sometimes to do this in the context of a family business that has been run for more than 100 years. How do you go and say, let's cannibalize our existing print business and prioritize digital because that is the future? Would you do that?
So I was talking about this earlier to Karthik. Now I'm giving a bit of a brief background on MM, and I said, I'm in the 4th generation of this business, right? Add to that, add the diversity factor to that. I'm married into the family, and I'm a woman. And then I talk about a product which is going to actually kill the 126-year-old product, right? You're talking about something which is just going to kill it. Or at least it'll take a different format. And this is 15, 20 years ago. Not the easiest position to be in. Having said that, I think we have proven time and again, not only when it comes to the internet, but in all the other products that we have in terms of the technology adaptation that we've had within the company, that this is a very important mindset that we need to have. You cannot survive unless you are willing to be a disruptor of your own businesses. You cannot go on just doing the same things again and again. You have to come up with new products and services which will cannibalize into your other products and services which are already existing and which are at that point more profitable. Yet you need to try these new things. We talked about, when we talked about mobiles, we had a mobile app which was at that time called an ODP, an on-demand portal. We had that in 2005, even before we launched our television channel. Digital started in '94 before television or radio. We expanded to this whole portal, big format by 2002. So we had to play these games. We started into classifieds. Now classifieds, literally, when you talk about the media industry, classifieds kill the media industry when you're talking about US and Europe. But we decided that we need to get into this classifieds way early in life so that when that disruption comes, we are ready and we are established in the market. That, I think, is the essence of being pioneers and being disruptors in technology. And I think you have to do it. Any company has to do it if you are willing, if you want to survive.
Okay. Very interesting observation.
If I could just add to that, I think, fundamentally, if you just go back and see, after telephone, electricity and telephones, what were the disruptors, right? It was obviously those transportation. Then there was the ability of the world community to do global trade and global exchange of commerce and ideas, right? Then there was IT, and now there is mobile. And in India and China, we have one more disruptor, which is youth.
Sure.
So we have youth with their aspirations. They have nothing to give. They don't worry about status quo being lost. You go to an older society, it's about maintaining status quo. Youth is about getting to the status quo. So you have two disruptions running in this country. And therefore, I think if you go back and have a conversation, Adam Smith, and talk about factors of production, instead of resources, capital, and labor, today what we're all saying here in this room is basically saying capital. I would like to put that first with your permission.
Absolutely.
Basically, obviously, talent, team, labor seems such an inappropriate expression. And the third thing really is, rather than resources and land, it's technology. The technology is now a factor of production. Without the technology, you can't be at the cutting edge. You can't disrupt. You can't keep up with disruptions. So I kind of, I'm associated with some think tank group, and we're actually saying, let's redo the factors of basic economics and have technology and marketing, right, as one of the factors, and start saying, how are you getting the productivity of this animal up every year 5-10%, which is what basically Adam would like us to do, and only then the silent hand is with us and not snatching from us, right? So that is just one small point I wanted to.
No, that's a very interesting point, in fact, that you make.
Also looking at these companies from outside in, if I could make, which is what I think you wanted me to talk about. I heard this excellent statement that Partha made about tenacity.
Right.
The way we look at it is slightly different. Basically, we say the most important thing we look for is ambition.
Okay.
Ambition is the mother and the father of many other sub-attributes. Tenacity, persistence, passion, whatever you want to do it. Normally, there are always exceptions. So ambition is something we grade. Mithun, for example, told me as soon as I met him, because we are all Madrasis, so he said, I met this guy for 2 hours last night. I met him for 2 hours this morning, and I'm going to meet him for again 2 hours in the afternoon. Ambition manifests itself in small behaviors. Ambition is not some giant, chest-thumping man or woman, right? So ambition is, in my mind, the mother of success. The second thing we basically look for is alignment. Why is this person doing this? Is he doing it because, like you said, Mithun, you're the richest guy in the country? It wouldn't excite us at all, right? Because fundamentally, that should be a collateral outcome rather than the purpose. Second is he doing it or she doing it because they want to raise enough money so that Partha will come and write this check, right? Not interesting. The ones which are most aligned, who are basically the ones which are saying, absolutely, I want to make this a permanent business. I want this to be a word like Uber has become. And in my generation, I'm giving this up, I hope you don't mind, the word fridge was a word. Actually, it's a brand name used as a category definition. Uber has become that way. Now, Uber X is what we talk about, right? So we look for that kind of alignment, that people see this as their permanent journey. Okay, if they get and become part of a joint family like Mahindra, no problem. If they get listed, no problem. And the last thing we look for really, when we look at from outside, which is really the contra of this, is kind of we look for a level of a person who can equally, having been ambitious, having alignment, can disassociate their persona from that of the business. And that's the toughest part. Because everybody says, I do this, I do that. But at some point in time when these businesses grow and you want to work in teams, it has to be business first. And what's good for the business? What's good for the business? Like our first rule in the fund is we say, if we take this action, is this the best thing for our investor? And are we doing it exclusively for our investor and not for our personal benefit? If we can answer, so I think these three things is kind of what we are absolutely focused on when people come to us. We're constantly sensing for it. Of course, we look for execution scale, is the person systematic, and all that. That is, to me, that if you don't cross that bar, you're not going to get, you're not going to get money.
Absolutely. In other words, do the right things, focus on doing the right things. The boring things like money will follow.
And also, be enormously strong about your desire to win. Whether it's a silent, quiet, burning fire inside simmering, or if you're one of those types who are jumping and shouting, that's your style. That doesn't matter.
Sure.
Yeah. Just to one small, the points, it is just not that you be at it, but you be at it in such a way that there is no tomorrow. That's the kind of thing they look. The other small thing that I've seen people ask me often when they're investing because 80% of my companies out of the 140 I have has private equity or VC funds.
Sure.
Yeah, because I just don't allow only M&M funds to be for them. Just to get, like benevolent fathers you don't need everywhere.
Right.
So you need, a lot of burning passion for them where they say people will also make money. So one of the things they talk about is governance. Yeah, at some stage, you got to get governance into place. Basically what it means is governance doesn't mean that you have to be holier than thou,
right,
but to get good practices in, yeah, so that they can trust, and transparency is another way to put it, that they also look at. But beyond that, passion and everything Gopal said is the main thing. The only addition I will do is governance also plays an important. It comes through family.
I'll add in another angle and
Yeah.
ask this question is, when a Mahindra and Mahindra goes and acquires companies which are in SME kind of a stage, right? How do you ensure, A, that you're picking the right groups, and what kind of filters would you apply, apart from passion and ambition, etc.? And secondly, how do you ensure they have skin in the game? Like say, you get into a REVA, for example. Obviously, both parties are doing it because you want to create a bigger platform with that opportunity. You want to say 1 + 1 = 11 or whatever, right? How do you get there?
Yeah.
How do you give them skin in the game? How do you make sure they contribute? How do you make sure they don't treat it as an exit already?
Yeah, it's a great question in the sense this is what keeps us awake in the night, in a sense.
Yeah.
The one thing that we absolutely focus on is there a culture fit.
Sure.
Okay, and second is when you acquire a company, don't only ask the question what is in it for you. Ask the question what is in it for them.
Correct.
What is in it for the people who are currently running it? What is there for the employees? And this is a small story that I wanted to say. I think I acquired one of the best deals, let's say. I don't want to name the company. Let's say I did it in, I thought it would cost $1 billion. I did it in 800 million, and I came to Mr. Keshub Mahindra and said, sir, I've done it, and I've got 20%, nobody else can do it at this. And, this is what I've done. And he asked me, what do they think? He didn't ask me, what do they think? And whether you are going, what is your thing? Are you going in partnership? Are you conquering mode? What's your? So cultural fit is an absolute must. Yeah. So we have given away some of the private entrepreneurs which we thought has great potential because they didn't fit the same kind of transparency and norms that we would have. Okay. And we would never have been able to live with that kind of a thing. So we've given up those. But cultural fit is absolutely must. The second one is after that, the only thing that I look at, and Gopal actually summarized those three, the passion, passion, and passion. If you had that and you want to back that, then you'll by and large, be successful. That's the way as a company we have looked at while acquiring. So if it's Bristlecone, we acquired something in US and said, you do it, run it on your own.
Sure.
We're just there to support you as you want and give the broader ecosystem. So culture and passion. These are two things you look at.
So basically you meaning the acquired company brings in the passion, and you bring in the systems and the ecosystem.
Yeah, systems and processes.
That's
But don't disturb them too much.
Sure.
Yeah. So because if you disturb them, then you're saying I'm buying a garage and making a palace out of it. Then frugal engineering goes out of the window. So you can't you can't let that go out of the window. That's
So Mithun, I'm going to move on to the next phase. We have talked about the funding and fundraising, how do you find the right guys? Then we talked about what other boosters are you looking for, and you talked about team, etc. Mariam talked about technology. They talked about passion. The next question I have for all of you, actually, I'd love to get your views is, what do you see as the role government can now play in giving the booster shot? I mean, everybody is talking about the various different things. Money does its own thing. The venture capital community contributes that, or the private equity community contributes that. You have employees, you have advisors. Yeah, I should have talked about that as a booster as well. Get good lawyers, all of you. That's the biggest booster for growth. But apart from that, I think you should talk about government. I mean, very often, unfortunately, it's said in India that companies have grown despite government, not because of government. I'm not sure I would entirely agree with that
Absolutely not.
Argument or the line of thinking. I think government needs to be and has been in some examples, great partners with private sector, even with startups in helping them grow. So if I were to ask each of you, what would be your wish list from the government? Today, our Prime Minister is in the hottest place on the planet from a technology and startups perspective. If you were to make one demand or one contribution to a wish list as to what you would like to see from state, central governments, what would that be?
I personally don't feel government has any role to play in this. I think it's overrated. Government has got lucky when they've done private sector investments, like, I don't know how many people know, Tanishq is owned by Tamil Nadu government. So I don't think, and I don't see what's the role of a Tamil Nadu government in a jewelry company. So I don't see why they should be holding on to it as well.
No, my question is not
going
so
up
much
enormously in value, one of the most valuable assets of the government.
Yes.
That's the reason they want to keep it.
One way to help is also to keep out of the way, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is true.
So I think as government,
That is true.
see, government is reactive. You must accept that part of it because government is not designed only for business. It's designed for keeping order, social structure, everything else like that. And it's a state of democracy we're in, so it's really, really hard right now as of a government to make decisions also. We see that right now. If we can just get more clearer, longer term thinking, policies, whatever they decide, if they can just have a longer vision and make their decisions which don't flip-flop change, or things don't happen on that part, I think that's just as much as my expectation of government is. I think there is a very vibrant ecosystem today available through all sorts of networks and risks and everything else available over there. Yeah, there are these small little things in Companies Act and everything else like that. I don't worry about that because I think government hears you on those things. It might take 6 months to come back, but they will make some changes, and there are fantastic council, and all of them can reach out to government and provide that. But in general, my expectation of government is to be, Modi's, whatever that statement is, minimum government is maximum governance, or whichever. I think that's the one that, if they do that, I think I'm happy with it. Yeah. I don't think Israel or Valley is supported by the government, and that's why they are where they are.
Yeah. Good. What do you think, Mani?
Yeah, I think I agree. It's a simple statement of stay out of business. I think government is important to create a stable structure and create parameters and walls and important decisions which have to be taken. But I'm an economics student. I'm all about pro-capitalism and all about letting markets play its own hand. I definitely don't think that government should interfere in many things which sometimes you wonder, right? I mean, you have statements about minimum governance and maximum this thing, but at the same time you have a government who's telling you, guess what, keep your WhatsApp and Google stuff for the last 90 days because we want to go through it. I mean, that makes no sense. So don't contradict yourself.
Unencrypted form.
So don't contradict yourself. Keep this into a system where everybody can grow and let people play the market. I mean, use the market to succeed and fail and move on. That's what it is.
Sure.
I'll just give you my biases, right? The last 20 years I've been in business. I've always been the head of the industry association.
Right.
So in some sense, I love public policy. So my biases are that. Having said that, I think I see the government having 4 roles. So I don't think it's as simple as saying just get out or do too much. I think first is at a micro level. At a micro level, just get out. Modi ji's statement saying, I want India to be the easiest place to do business, come from 142 to 10, make sure every state is publishing the index to put pressure on them to perform. There, I think, just get out of the way. Don't come in the way. Sure. For example, to get something, suppose he wants to sell his share to me, which I hope he will one day. So there is something called a Section 281, which he has to get from Income Tax Department.
Yeah.
In Bombay, it takes, I'm told, 6 months. 6 months. In Chennai, it takes 1 week.
Right.
That is, if you are a group who has got an impeccable reputation. These kind of things should be done 2 clicks online.
Yeah. Sure.
So that is where I think the micro works. I'm just taking that as a specific example. Make the micro, government should be invisible as far as micro is concerned. Then I think there is something which I call basically the macro, which is fundamentally creating policy frameworks. For example, if the government had not created IITs, we wouldn't be where we are.
Sure.
So the government has a lot of power to make long term. So the government should make impact in a 10, 20-year horizon. 20 years, 30 years from now, what is the issues in India? We should talk about how do we create, whether it's creating ecosystems like education, or whether it is creating, for example, this road around the country. It's a big risk actually. It's a VC risk to run a road for tens of thousands of crores, or put windmills between in the Setu area. Right. Those are big bets. The government has to do that because nobody will take the 20-year bet like in any economy. Right. The third thing the government really has to do is, I think, fundamentally worry about the tone at the top. I think PM is doing a fantastic job. He is basically evangelizing in India, and critically, when he says stand up, start up, I think he's making Indians proud about being Indian, which was, for me personally, when I started my life, a burning desire to do that. So fundamentally, it's so important the tone at the top is set by the government. The government should not be apologizing to India, or like some of our prime ministers praising the British for their contribution to India, but just making young Indians, come and say, wow, I'm so lucky to have been born here. Sure. Yeah. And lastly, I think the government has one very long-term issue, which America has done such a bad job of. And therefore, I don't think market forces work there personally. And that is to create too much of disparity of wealth. I think buildings like in Bombay of one individual are icons of potential problems, of social problems in this country. We are a country which works in a certain culture. Too much of disparity is a problem. Too much of luxury is a problem if all others don't have it. Right. So I think inclusive luxury, great. I think the long-term issue, and this is a 20, 30-year issue where people in the audience will be sitting here and debating, I think, in 20, 30 years, is if the disparity becomes the level of America where 1% controls, I don't know, some 10, 30% of the population, of the wealth, I'm not sure how India will function. I think government has a role there. So those will be, I straddle both sides of the fence.
That's a very all-encompassing kind of an analysis on the role of government. That's very, very useful for everybody to hear. Partha, what about you? Yeah. Would you say step out, or would you be inclined to agree?
No, I'm more towards maybe this is a so I think there is I think first and foremost is think about it. Youth is the future of India and the demographics support it. Now youth have to take risks. Can the government provide a safety net? To me, this is the over-consuming thing. You know, for example, how did exports rise in India? Because Exim said that, there is a protection, if guarantee. If export we did, as a government can get, we can bring in that pool, which then brings the safety net for exports. Similarly, if we bring a safety net for these young India, I think this is an important thing there where they can play a role. Bring a social security equivalent, or at least risk guarantee. This is something that has been done very successfully in export. Can we bring something to that to India? I mean, this is my wish list. I mean, you asked about a wish list. Sure. Second part, you wanted to say something? Sorry, yes.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to start a debate out here because we're, I think, in two ends of the spectrum, but that's okay. I think that's not something meant for this.
So no, as a wish list.
We can certainly have it offline.
Yeah. So no, we certainly can have that debate. The second part, if I can kind of suggest that we have to do, is that if we make long-term infrastructure, China, if we can learn something about it, make India an easy place to work. All these slogans are the right start, but they can't end in slogans. They will have to end in concrete action of getting this infrastructure. If I can have 60 days in port stuck, how will business doing? How does delivery get fast? True. So, this is a burning issue, and I think we need to sort this out. And to 30 kilometers a day road is a great thing. I think more of this should follow. I think those are concrete actions. Okay. The third one that you can think about while looking at the government's role is, can we make long-term policy? I mean, I'm just repeating what probably Gopal said, and he said it better. But if we keep having flip-flops in policy, how will that be a conducive environment? It is not a 30% tax issue, but is there a consistency, or will it change? Right. Yeah. Do we have a long-term fiscal policy versus, tax, fiscal, monetary, fiscal, and budget all combined into one? So which makes for this kind of a flip-flop. So long-term policy. Last is, please remember, why did China grow? Another story is VC and PEs investors invest. And they need that atmosphere to do. So how do we make this atmosphere come? So only these four: youth, infrastructure, long term, and attract foreign investors here. And there, Modi is doing a very, very important one.
Job, yeah.
And I must confess that, what Gopal said struck a chord to me, because the mission statement of M&M started by saying Indians are second to none. Okay, so so I will second that fully. So,
Absolutely. I don't think we are second to anyone.
None.
Indeed. Yeah. And continuing on that note, I think one point that you made in the end is something which I want to touch upon, which is the point about exits. Anybody who is planning growth, any company that is planning its growth phase, has to think about two things. Has to think about what is the exit going to be for the investors that are supporting me, and maybe what is the exit going to be for themselves as well, because not everybody maybe is looking to build a Mahindra or a TVS Motors, right? There are some people who want to do this as a, bring it to a certain scale and just exit or get onto some other platform, etc. In either way, the one question I want to put to the entire panel, and this is going to be the last question, by the way, so if anybody in the audience has questions, you can start tweeting them, and tweeting them, and this is going to be the last question I'm asking the panel for now. And the question is, do you think our exit framework is a little skewed in our country? Why I ask that because we have literally scores and scores of companies that are listed, which have no business being listed. They were listed for the wrong reasons. They were listed for reasons like raising capital, reasons like visibility and stuff like that. And a lot of them are languishing. Many of them are thinly traded. And our delisting guidelines are very cumbersome. It's very difficult to take a listed company private. So the one question I want to, given this background, ask everybody is, do you think it will help if India had an easy framework for a secondary market, like second market in the US, right? If second market hadn't existed, Facebook would have been bullied into going public probably much sooner than it did. But because of second market, they could stay private till they were ready to actually become a public company and assume the responsibilities that went with it, the costs that went with it. So what would you say in terms of, should we have some sort of a real ecosystem to be created like a second market in India, and do you think it will work in India?
Yeah, so sorry, if I can go first.
Sure.
Is it okay? Yeah. So first and foremost is that the debt as well as equity market is very shallow in India. Both the debt market and the equity market. So it's not just the equity market or IPO which is shallow are the only option. Even the debt market is very shallow. There are not many options. You can't raise many ways of raising capital. So if in US or in Europe you have 20 ways of raising, you probably have 3 or 4 ways of raising here by practical compulsions. Okay. So clearly the widening and deepening the pond is an important and big issue in front of India. Okay, as we go along, the financial market in US versus GDP may be many times more, multiples as compared to India. So clearly we have a big issue there, and one of our success factors in future will depend on how big, how fast, how broad, and how deep we make the market. Okay?
Sure.
So we issued a 50-year bond. And do you believe it is the first time that was 50-year bullet repayment bond? This is the first time it was issued in India. So, I mean, and it's so logical that we should be able to issue that kind of things.
Sure.
But it was never done. It was the first time it was done because we and Yes Bank decided that we want to create a category. Otherwise, it didn't exist. So that is how shallow the market is. So we need to deepen. So obviously, what's the option available to a person to exit or to create wealth? Let me ask that question. One way is to think of it as creation of wealth. It's a wealth creation opportunity. Okay. So if you list, then the overall wealth of this goes away. Even if I don't sell my share, I still know my wealth is, I've created wealth for myself. It's now 10x. Yeah?
Right.
Okay. So if a 58 rupees Satyam share, and then I merge it, and now it's a listed company, it's 580 rupees, it's 10x, I've created wealth, at 20x I've created wealth. So that becomes very clear, and some of them can clearly exit. So IPO is the easiest route available. But is it the best route? Always. You ask the question and you answered it as well. It may not be. It depends on what frame time you are in. Okay? So now for a minute, leave that and say, what is the other option I have? Other option I have is to take money from a PE.
Right.
Okay? Then I was having a conference only few days back, and the gentleman who spoke in, from RBI actually had a big issue which he wanted to put in front of us, that today valuation is like passing the pillow. So everybody is today valuing at 10 million, he is passing on the pillow to guy who values 20 million and then 40 million. He says, I don't know what will happen when the music stops. Okay? Yeah. And this is a clear issue. So the other option which is available there, let us stop with Mithun. Okay. So the problem, this is his issue. Okay. So in this, what is the other option available is another P, hopefully that mission. So what is he going to? He is going to come with lots of caveats, how you operate. I'll get involved. I want a board seat. I will write so many affirmative rights. Yeah. So these all comes with this. So between these two, unless there are other things which are having, these are the things available.
Sure.
But today, given the situation, and then there is a third one available, which is you can always go to a TVS or Mahindra and say, I want to be part of the larger platform, or Malayalam Manorama. So you can, these are the few chances which are available. But we are stuck between smaller option. If you are in US, you could do a, what is that, below the counter trading or above the counter trading, and you can have debt options of many, you can have, subordinated, you can have class B, yeah, all that kind of things, many things could exist.
Sure.
Sorry, long answer.
So I'm just going to completely agree with him. You need basically multiple sources of long-term capital, especially bond market. Just to put a perspective, the Indian bond market as a percentage of GDP, I think is in the 20s.
Right.
If you go to some place like say Malaysia, it's 40% of the GDP. So clearly debt equity, and I just of course want to pitch for private equity and say that over the last 4 years, private equity is equal to FDI.
Yeah.
So having said that, I want to go against private equity and also basically say that if you need $500–600 billion of capital every year in India, debt plus equity, which is typically what the ratios will tell you, private equity only provides 15 billion. So it's not really for the majority, it's for a small minority. Yeah. Just to make that little point.
Yeah.
I think my view is on exits, which is where you started, two types of things. One is private equity VC exits. Private equity VC investment is about hope for the next 5 to 7 years. If 5 to 7 years later, like in the UPA regime, the reality was not what it was made out to be, there is a clear clash. Right. Because then what's happening, hitting your head into the roof. So you expected the roof to grow multifold, but suddenly the roof didn't grow, the ceiling is too low, you got your head hit, which is why you got the accumulated backlog of VCP issues, because the economy didn't grow to suck up all these companies, right? So I think that is a big issue, and I think currently the way we're going, it looks like the ceiling will, keep on going, so we don't have to worry about crashing into the ceiling. Exits will happen, because people are rushing to India. There is really no other market practically other than US, India, and China. Triad was a book in the 1980s written by a McKinsey consultant which said, Japan, Europe, and America will rule the world. Guess what? It changed. Yeah. That's also been disrupted. It's now China, India, and America. Sure. Second thing I want to say is about public market exits. I think it's the same issue. People expected far more liquidity, and also there is this FOMO, right, which is the friend of Tina, which we all know lives in this room. So in the FOMO model, if you are an entrepreneur, and you went for a whatever YI event or a YPO event or a CI event and say, "Arey, tera company list nahi hua kya?" Exactly. It's like that became a huge fashion. So people went, and government also, SEBI made it easy to list, which I think they should actually. So I think you have a catch up there to do, and therefore delisting is very crucial. So I fully agree with the point you made. I'm not really sure you need a market like second market. I think today the SME vision of SEBI, I think, is completely shall we say, what's the right word? People haven't understood it. It's a very, very powerful system that SEBI has come out with. And I think we have enough smart people in the country, they will catch on to it. They've actually said, without really assessing your risks, I'm going to go ahead and let you list. But guess what I'm going to do? I'm only going to allow institutions and accredited investors to invest. Right. So these are the guys, if they lose their money, well, that's their bad luck.
Sure.
Yeah, well, and they are informed investors. I mean, they are not.
They've done that with the. I mean, this can address prospective or new companies which are seeking to.
So there's a history.
The baggage still needs to be fixed.
There's a baggage issue which Modi keeps talking about, saying he says there's a itihasic problem, as he calls it. I don't know what the word for problem in Hindi is.
Sure.
And then there is basically the new issue. So I think fundamentally the SEBI Smart Startup Exchange is going to be a game changer for India. And this accredited investor is going to be a pivot for this whole thing, because unless we can identify the investor, there's going to be a giant crashing sound in 2 to 3 years when many of the angel funded companies fail.
Right.
I think there's going to be something called the angel scam, which is going to come soon. Because somebody got lucky, they gave money to Mithun. But for every guy who gave money to Mithun, there are 19 people who were just feeling good and wanting to do the right thing and wanting to make money.
Right.
And some of them shouldn't be doing it because they're not having the net worth to say, this is 5% of my funds. I'm happy to, but I do angel investing. I write it to zero the time I write the check.
Right.
So so I think those kind of issues will also come when accredited investors become possible. This is why we need the government, because the government is not willing to tell us each person's tax status. We can never know who is an AI. Sure. So Aadhaar for investors is what AI will become in India.
Okay, that's a great point. And we hope that the SME exchange really takes off. And personally speaking, given the amount of time I have invested in writing to SEBI with suggested changes, we also hope that delisting regulations take off, because
this is a great point.
Yeah, that's
I think there's a lot of inefficiency trapped and listed in the stock exchanges today, which has no business being there.
Yeah, we can't just wind down any company. That's another issue.
That's another issue, absolutely. Now let me get views from Mithun.
I'm just a shopkeeper who hasn't figured any of this out, so I'm happy to just listen to this and defer the question away.
Okay.
I think Partha and Gopal have really explained it very well. I don't think we need to add on to that.
In terms of exchanges and
Yeah, and I think it's natural progression, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we're still in very early stages, and as the startup economy kind of pushes and moves on, it's going to evolve, and we seem to have a government who's at least listening. I don't know how much they're doing, but they're listening. So I think it's a part of progression, natural part of progression, second markets and delisting. So I think I'm not very concerned about that. I think there are enough people who are talking about it, and I think there is going to be progression.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful session. I think the great thoughts were raised. I think we will now open the floor to questions from the audience. We have the seats. Thank you.
Hi. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
My name is Suhas, and I'm one of the founding employees of a company called as...
Louder.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. So I'm one of the founding employees for a company called as Sprinkler. We are a startup unicorn, valuating at 1.2 billion. It's a social software company. And currently our products and services are not available in India. Right? So my question to Mr. Gopal and Parthasarathy is to understand what is that key element you look into when you're understanding the market maturity in APAC region.
Sorry, what is that you're asking?
The key element you look into when you are actually expanding your product or services in APAC region as a market maturity.
Okay. So can I just test understanding that what you want to do is that if you want to expand into products or services into the APAC region,
exactly.
What should you be looking to?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. So and this could be traditional product as well as digital, right? Okay. Obviously, digital is far more easier. I can only, if it is digital, all I have to say is that I have to kind of make sure about two things. One, the government allows it, because without that people can't say, and then I make enough noise about that product and service being available on the net, and then hope that customers catch on. But if I'm looking at any market, what first I would say is that I have a 3-step process of figuring this out. This is a traditional model. What I implemented when I went global as a CEO of all global operations. So first is product market fit. Okay. So first check out whether there is a product and market fit to yours. I mean, basically, if I'm saying, just take an example of tractors. If I'm going to Iran, then is that market has enough market potential and is my product matching. For example, I cannot go ever to Europe. I mean, you said APAC, but I'm broad basing it because the tractors are all above 100 horsepower and my tractors are all 60 horsepower. So that's product market fit. Second is market size. Is there potential? And that's obvious, so I'm not spending too much time on this. And the third one is price earning. Yeah. So are you going to go there and earn some money out of it or not? So if you pass these three filters, whatever then said, straightforward metrics, but if you had to do it, I would, in a process term, I would suggest you do what is I call as a, strategy chessboard. Put all the, variables on one side and all the countries on the other side and try to put that. Whatever that chessboard which shows you where your king comes out or your queen comes out are the territories to go to. So in a very broad manner.
Let me just go to the next question.
We'll go to the next one. Okay. There's a question for Mithun. So can India grow, sorry, that's not the question. So the question for you, Mithun, is do people in tier 2 and tier 3 cities consider buying online jewelry as safe? And how do you deal with that perception of problem? Yeah.
It's not the, it's the people, I mean, you got to break that data down. City is a very, very large data point as such. And there are individuals in metros who don't consider it safe, and there are individuals in tier 2, 3, and even beyond that, because it's not just about, I think somewhere credibility has to get established and then safety then gets assumed. It's the job that we are supposed to do to make them feel safe about it. The second part of it, access for them is weak, and thus this becomes a good viable option to look at and do this thing. So, but there are still more people who don't buy jewelry online than there are who buy online. So that's the part that excites me a lot also.
Okay. Yeah. Question for you, Gopal, is can India grow in the present scenario of strikingly high corporate debt, low profitability, and dangerous NPA figures?
I think basically there is a very big merit to that point, that fundamentally what we've inherited from the past, especially in certain sectors where they've got 50,000, 30,000 crores. I think the question I would ask is, I would get guided by the way India is dealing with the problem rather than the problem itself. So the way India is dealing with the problem with the government we have and the outstanding Reserve Bank governor we have, I would say is very positive. They're taking public sector bank chairman role seriously. They're separating, they're putting very talented MDs in charge. The strategic debt restructuring program of the government, which actually, I don't know whether many people are aware that today the bank can take over 51% of your company by press of a button, bring a private equity or a stressed asset fund manager to take over management, take you out. In fact, taking you out is a mandatory condition in the SDR. And 7 companies it has happened with debt of more than 5 to 10,000 crores. So I think the way we're dealing with it, I think there is a future. It's a tough problem. So you're asking a person who's not yet advanced cancer, but can this cancer be cured? I think we have a very great set of doctors and medicines right now.
Sure, thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question for Gopal. So this new Companies Act that came out, not exactly new, 1 year ago, do you call it micromanaging or macromanaging? Something that's set up for 20 years down the line or something that's interfering in the way business are run. So it's open to both.
I think Partha will have my limited view is fundamentally it's a huge missed opportunity. This could have been an opportunity to simplify life for MSME. In India we know that 92% of jobs actually come from own account companies, own account enterprises and MSMEs. And really in my way this has been like the curse on the MSMEs. I think the good news again is that they seem to be wanting to fix it. This law was made for large companies. So like he said, women directors, I think great ideas. Some of the stuff they've enforced on boards, while we find it onerous, are actually very good for the long term. We have to accept that. But for the larger part of India, gosh, this is basically like asking every chaiwala to now run on SAP as an ERP system.
Yeah. That's true. I think he summarized this beautifully. So I mean, it is not micromanaging, but the intent was great. But the onerous responsibilities has made it go even beyond what US kind of does. You know, it's very good for the investors especially. They want us go to, you know, companies out with IFRS will actually make India on par in terms of disclosure with everybody. That's great. But if you start micromanaging MSME, that's not great.
Yeah.
So,
and as a transactional lawyer, I would have to agree because most of the transactions that we used to do, there has become an added compliance cost and there's an added timeline. So I don't understand where you know, venture capital fund is putting money into a you know, startup. The process should be really quick. It should be like 2 clicks, like you said, right? It should be I'm just issuing them, signing the agreement and funding. Whereas it's become a long drawn debate on whether it's a rights issue, whether it should be a preferential allotment. Nobody cares. And it really need not be such a debated issue. So I think in some ways it needs to be simple.
And they have a toxic weapon for all of you called 56B2, right? Of the Income Tax Act. Yeah.
Absolutely.
yeah.
Anybody else?
I have a question for Partha and Gopal. What do you think about SEBI's move to allow startups to list, and for the benefit of the startups here, how do you think startups must look at it?
Yeah. Sorry, his question was, you already partly answered it.
Yes. Yeah.
So they are allowing startups to list now, you know, SEBI. What do you think about that? And what is the second part of the question?
So how do startups look at it? As in,
okay. How should startup look at it?
Yeah.
No, I think basically what SEBI is doing is creating, in my mind, a mezzanine floor between a listed company and a VCP funded company. So look at what they've said. First is this company must have an institutional investor present in the company. So they know that some level of governance, etc. has taken place. Second thing they've said is, we are not going to impose any judgmental norms on you. Well, so if your valuation is revenue, its valuation is a multiple of GMV, whether it's a number of people that are signing up each year, whether the cohort is remaining stable, the churn is not high, they're leaving all that to you. So you go figure it out. So they've given a lot of flexibility, which I think is extremely unusual.
Yeah.
Right? Remember, 23 or so, or whatever the number of unicorns plus decacons in America, remember that post Google, Facebook, not one is listed. So America has got this kind of huge fossilized unicorn stroke decacons hanging around. So we actually should look at this regulation and say, wow, this is amazing. This is like way ahead of the US, right? And I'm not sure this should be benchmark. People should, 10 years, say, wow, this is way ahead of India. We have to get to that place. The third thing they've done is fundamentally saying that only knowledgeable investors who can afford to lose the money should be allowed to participate.
Yeah.
So in Vijay's words, Mithun should be allowed to participate. So fundamentally, that I think is fantastic. You know, it's like a VC fund, right? You put money in a VC fund, it goes to zero, you say, sorry, chum, bad luck. That's what you should be told. Of course, the VC will never try to let you do that because, as we know, VC funds rarely lose money. But fundamentally, I think the key issue is great. I think it means a lot of things to start up, but think of it as a mezz. Don't think of it as the first floor. So ground floor should be still angel funding, your own funding, VC funding, Series A, Series B. But before you go to the public market, they've provided you a mezz platform. I think it's just amazing. I can't believe it's something like Aadhaar. We underestimate Aadhaar. Whatever you give credit for Aadhaar, you still underestimate it. Yeah. Same way, I think this works the same way.
Yeah. So just to say, give a quick this one. Till now it was from Papa to PE. Now he's opened one more category. Yeah, beyond that.
Well put.
Yeah. Any other questions, please?
There's some other
Time is up, he says. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes. I think we'll take just 2 more questions, this one and one after that. I think you had a question, right? Okay.
My name is Yusuf. I run an environmental business in Coimbatore. Just a few months back, I attended an environmental conference where the theme of the conference was it's virtually impossible to have infinite growth in a finite planet. And here I am at Growth Hack, and where everyone seems to be obsessed with growth without really talking about the consequences. So should I stop attending conferences, or is there a middle way for this?
I think clearly you're making a case for lack of growth in conferences in the future.
to you.
Who's that?
Well, just one more point. I mean, obviously the middle way is grow sustainably, but the fact is investors don't care about how you grow. They just care about growth and returns. So
I just take one quick stab. I think Partha is the right person to answer it. But my quick stab at it would be that fundamentally for the people who haven't experienced quality of life like in India, you have to provide them with that kind of growth. It's a humanitarian thing to do. So their consumption is going to increase, and I think we owe it to them. But they have to grow, as I'm sure you know, responsibly in terms of doing frugal kind of things. Second thing is, all this growth we're talking about, right, is a lot of it is transformation. It's not really adding on to the stack, but it's changing the stack. So it is basically B instead of A. And the most important thing from Adam Smith, Darwin perspective, right, is the transformation is Darwin. It's adaptation, survival of the fittest. But where Adam Smith comes in is to say that all of it is creating dramatic changes in the impact on the planet because they're increasing productivity of everything. And I think by adding a fourth factor of production and saying, did all the on-demand food and all the on-demand e-commerce create lesser carbon footprint, will definitely come, and you will see that this may be the digital economy will actually reduce carbon footprint if it's done in that kind of fashion.
So, yeah, so only one. Yeah.
Got thrown out.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, no. Just one thing, that if India has to grow at 7% or 9% GDP and become, the destined number one, there is no option to not having growth. So growth is, you can always say growth on whatever growth you require in order to become that kind of a thing. So growth is going to be a big important factor. Environmental concern is about future. So you cannot miss that either. Okay, so attend both.
Thank you. One more question, one last question, please. Yeah.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Meenakshi. I'm in advertising. I'm just seeing in a lot of cities, too many companies coming up, too many startups, too many entrepreneurs. Is it going to be chaos, or who will be the consumer? And so many big companies and small companies, will there be too much of competition and consumer problems?
Mithun. And
could you repeat that?
I'm saying.
It was a little chaotic.
Okay. I'm just saying that there are too many established players in the market, and there are too many startups coming up, and a lot of entrepreneurs. So will there be a confusion between what to consume, where to go, and too much of competition between big players and small players and all this?
It's not a bad thing, right, for a consumer. I presume you're a consumer. I mean, you have more choices, means more discounts, means, better pricing, better quality of service. I think online today is providing, in general, at least I feel that, has uplifted the quality of service in India significantly from what we were used to expecting for a very, very long period of time. Even 5 years back, my own experience of having bought a Samsung refrigerator, and then when they had somebody in my house in 48 hours to rectify it, it felt like outstanding. I mean, in 48 hours somebody came and they were ready to do it. And I thought Samsung was the ultimate thing. Today you get answer, you tweet a question, you get an answer back in like 3 minutes or 30 seconds, right? And all of this has impacts. Yes, some businesses will fall along the line, and some businesses will really succeed on that part. So, but I don't see any reason. I think a bloodbath is good. It's not a bad thing at all. And please, and bloodbath doesn't happen in every category. There are categories which are going to be winner takes all category. It is going to be bloodbath. You will see that in the like Ola, Uber, and taxi for sure. Only two could have survived, because if you don't have 40% market share, you just cannot survive in a category like that. And that's been the case even in taxis otherwise. If you looked at Bangalore as a city and looked at taxi services, possibly two taxi services were doing the best job, and there was nobody else doing anything else. The third and fourth didn't even exist really. If you looked at fashion, for example, or jewelry, for example, nobody has more than 3 or 4% market share, and thus everybody will survive. It's a question of at what scale will they survive. So I don't think it will create a bloodbath. It might create a bloodbath at the investor level just because they think somebody might have backed a lot more than it should have been. But I think that's fine. As the SME platform also says that you know they have the ability to take that risk. And so that's why, I mean, they're willfully taking that risk, saying that, you know, one of these is going to be 10x and some of these might just fall by the way. So I don't think Bloodbath's unplanned phenomena. It's going to be almost like a planned thing.
You know, can I add to that? See, we are at a period of time, what we call the Internet of Things happening, right? We're actually in a good place for startups to be. See, when you talk about even Moore's Law, right? I mean, you think about it, at one point of time, say, for example, in 1985, when you talk about Craze supercomputer, the second version of it, it was $32 million, not accessible. But, you know, you had different startups, different people trying out, and you have in 2011 an iPad 2, which does, you know, in rough benchmarking terms, similar things for $500. So it kind of makes things so much more accessible. Then you have this great network of information going on there. See, at one point of time, creating content was difficult and very expensive, but now you're getting people involved in creating content. So you're improving the ecosystem. And then you have the whole, you know, the network services. You have products like social media, where you have, you know, for a company, it gets better marketing, better customer relationship, and it creates a transparency and a responsibility to service your customers better. So there are so many things. Crowdfunding, when you talk about, you know, Kickstarter, Indigo, there are so many of these things which are good that I don't think it's a bloodbath, but what will work are the ones which have great, I mean, we've discussed this, right? Great growth potential will work. And it's good for the consumers because it has to evolve. I mean, you look at Web 1.0 and look at what it is today. I mean, it has evolved for the betterment of consumers and also for the environment, as we talked about.
Can I just say one thing? I just want to close with one remark. I come from a generation where the first thing we did when we went abroad to foreign, that is, basically we drank a canned Coke because we couldn't get Coke in India. I'm so delighted that India has come to the point we're worried about too many choices. So it's great for India, if you ask me.
Thank you, everybody. We just have a couple of important announcements. First thing, we need to give out a token of appreciation. So I invite the YI chair of Bangalore, George, and the co-chair Rajesh to come up on the stage. We'll start off with Mr. Wilson. Make a round of applause. Thank you so much. Mr. Parth Prasad, thank you, sir, so much. Coming down from Bombay and heading back today. Thanks for your time. Mr. Srinivasan, thank you, sir. Thanks for your time. And last but not the least, the star of the show, Vijay.